It was a lonely period. It was a long period. It was tiring. It was exhausting. But I had taken on the project of making Superman, and damn it, nothing was going to stop me.
Shortly after Superman the movie's 1978 premiere, producer Pierre Spengler told the press that he was more than satisfied with the product delivered by director Richard Donner, and that he looked forward to continuing their partnership. However, during its promotional tour, Donner himself conveyed a drastically different sentiment. The frustrated director publicly disparaged the producers on more than one occasion, at first indicating that he was willing to work with Spengler again, but only on his own terms, which meant total creative control, something he knew very well the Salkinds would never relinquish. Donner also specified that Spengler could only act as a simple liaison between the producers and their money, and have no creative say whatsoever. However, the director eventually concluded that he wouldn't be able to return in any capacity if Spengler was involved, and made it quite clear that he was not willing to rejoin the production under any other conditions. To make matters worse, the Salkinds were financially obligated to resume principal photography post-haste, and Donner would be tied up promoting the first film for quite some time. Unable to reconcile their differences and faced with a ticking clock, the Salkinds made the pivotal decision to part ways with Donner. Ilya Salkind later clarifying that the director's ultimatum regarding Pierre Spengler was the deciding factor, as Ilya and Spengler had been close friends since grade school. And so, despite bringing them box office glory and awards acclaim, this spelled the end of Richard Donner's time on Superman. And in March 1979, the director was notified of his formal termination via telegram, wherein he learned that Richard Lester was taking over the production. Donner said that he never heard from Lester again. Upon receiving notice, Donner said he became enraged because, in his view, the Salkinds had snatched his baby and given it to someone else. But despite high emotions, the director knew he could do nothing to take it back. The choice to move on without Donner was met with confusion and outrage by many in the cast and crew, who were not only ill-informed of the situation, but more so, held a deep sense of loyalty to Donner. And so what followed was a stinging backlash, with Jack O'Halloran later framing it as a father being taken from his family. Some members of the original production bowed out entirely, including writer and creative consultant Tom Mankiewicz and editor Stuart Baird. By early 1979, while Donner was out of country promoting Part 1, uncredited producer Richard Lester was also unavailable to take over as director, then busy shooting the historical drama Cuba, and so the Salkinds again reached out to original Superman director Guy Hamilton to helm Part 2. Unfortunately, the filmmaker was still unable to commit to filming in the UK, and so over 2 months passed before Warner Brothers finally stepped in. The studio again returned to Lester, who by then was available, and offered him $500,000 to pick up where Donner left off. However, Lester was hesitant to take on the job, not only uninterested in finishing someone else's movie, but was resistant to sinking himself any deeper into the comic book genre. After all, Lester thought of himself as an artist who made clever and smart films for adults, not ones about flying men in red capes adapted from juvenile fiction. Alas, the allure of $500,000 to finish half a movie was too powerful to resist. In the lead-up to the sequel's release, Warner Brothers was in talks with the Directors Guild of America to establish co-directing credits for Lester and Donner, the organization mandating that Lester film at minimum 40% of the movie in order to receive credit, although he spent most of production under the assumption that he wouldn't receive any credit whatsoever. What's more, when Donner was asked if he was willing to take a co-director title, he coldly responded, "I don't share credit." In the end, the producers decided to fork over a little more money to have Lester reshoot a portion of the scenes already finished by Donner, in addition to entirely new ones, therefore allowing him to legally claim the sole directing credit. And thus began the quest to finish the world's first superhero sequel. And although it would be reshaped with a new director's at times sillier sensibilities, it nonetheless introduced what became the staple ingredients for the comic book movie follow-up. That is, a film darker, louder, and bigger than its predecessor in almost every way. One that plunges its characters to their lowest depths, while wowing the audience with revved-up movie-making magic, the likes of which had never been seen before. Because the two films had been restructured in order to release Part 1 as a potentially standalone feature, the sequel demanded extensive rewrites, and in the absence of Tom Mankiewicz, David and Leslie Newman were brought back into the fold, charged with reshaping Superman 2 into a deserving second chapter. Most notably, the Newmans introduced a new thrilling opening in the form of a hostage situation at the Eiffel Tower, which replaced a scene written by Mankiewicz and already shot by Donner that showed a desperate Lois defenestrating herself in order to provoke Clark's true identity. This, of course, was somewhat repositioned to the Niagara Falls sequence. An alternative ending also had to be concocted, again the original concept having been reallocated to the first film, which led to the fabrication of an entirely new super ability, Clark erasing Lois's memory of his Kryptonian heritage with a magical super kiss. In fact, controversially, Lester and the writers took great liberties with Superman and the other Kryptonians' powers, and introduced several other new tricks not found in the comics, including telekinesis, teleportation, holographic self-duplication, and perhaps most egregiously, Superman able to pull a cellophane copy of his own insignia from off his chest and toss it at his aggressors, although it seemingly accomplishes nothing. All that being said, these wackier additions possibly acted as an homage to the character's Silver Age era, where comic writers often took Superman into patently goofy territory. More so, however, he and the Newmans worked to infuse broader comedy and even sight gags into the sequel, no doubt resulting in a markedly sillier film than its predecessor, which was already not entirely self-serious. These, some might say, contentious kooky add-ons gave our supervillains more fish-out-of-water shenanigans, and aimed to provide comic relief in the film's otherwise devastating end battle sequence, most prominently in shots showing various citizens being helplessly blown down the street. Lester also wanted to give the actors and characters more room to breathe, and ensured that every third scene or so was a special effects-free interaction. The sequel also more deeply explored the love story of Lois and Superman, which takes center stage for a large portion of the film. The pre- and post-lovemaking scenes were also handled delicately and with the family audience in mind, but this was at first a controversial story point. Although Superman and Lois's relationship became the heart of the second film, this element was actually a lingering fragment from Mario Puzo's script, and became a major sticking point for DC Comics, who felt that sex and Superman should never mix. However, once the producers assured them that it would all be handled through an innocent lens, the company relented. As with the first film, every word of Superman 2's script had to be approved by the copyright holders, which by then had taken on the name of its flagship property, DC Comics, and the Newmans submitted their final shooting script in late July 1979. Although the patched-up story had been salvaged with DC's seal of approval, the sequel's troubles were just beginning. And as it would turn out, Mario Puzo was certainly not the only plaintiff to arise from the first production. Not long after Superman the movie's debut, Marlon Brando and his production company, Pennypoke, hit the Salkinds with a $50 million lawsuit for unpaid shares of the box office totals, the star even having gone as far as to seek a restraining order for the use of his likeness in the sequel. While this ludicrous move was swiftly dismissed, the actor ultimately won a devastating settlement, which resulted in an explosive $15 million payout. However, Brando's litigiousness naturally soured his rapport with the producers, who wasted no time in announcing that all of his scenes filmed for Superman 2 would be removed and reshot. Although the Salkinds publicly denied this was a retaliatory decision, in reality it was in fact wholly to avoid owing the actor any further box office percentages. Furthermore, this unexpected move not only upset fans who were hoping to see more of the character, but occurred just prior to the exit of Richard Donner, who was adamantly opposed to Brando's erasure. And so it became yet another factor in the filmmaker's departure. Like a 1-2 punch, Donner and Margot Kidder next slapped the filmmakers with 2 more lawsuits, which alleged that the father-son partners fraudulently manipulated box office numbers in order to rob them of rightful royalties. Kidder, in fact, not only sued, but took her fight to the court of public opinion, and so passionately denounced the Salkinds' devious actions that they threatened to countersue the star for slander. This war of words grew so nasty that it permanently tarnished their professional relationship, which is clearly reflected in Lois's reduced presence in the later films. To sum it all up, during the sequel's press tour, Kidder told journalists, "They tried to screw me out of $40,000, which was a huge amount of money to me. They were behaving totally illegally, and it ended up costing them over $1 million." By October 1977, well over a year ahead of Part 1's release, stars Gene Hackman, Ned Beatty, and Valerie Perrine had finished filming their scenes, and so only select cast members were needed to reprise their roles, which included Jackie Cooper, Mark McClure, and our 3 alien villains. While it was initially rumored that Hackman refused to do any reshoots or ADR due to Richard Donner's absence, Ilya Salkind has chalked this up to hearsay and said that Hackman was one of the busiest stars in the world and was merely unavailable. And after all, the actor went on to participate in the film's rollout and still received top billing. However, reshoots for some of Hackman's scenes were still necessary, and so a body double and voice impersonator had to be carefully incorporated for certain pickup shots.
Hi guys, sorry
We have no more.
However, production could not move forward in any form until Superman himself agreed to return. Although it had brought him overnight fame and fortune, Christopher Reeve was hesitant to continue filming on the sequel, and as a result, an all-out war ensued to get him back in costume. 5 months had passed since the end of production on Superman the movie, and having fulfilled his contractual obligations, the now A-list star quickly signed on to headline his first post-Superman outing, Jeannot Schwartz's 1980 fantasy romance, Somewhere in Time. However, according to Reeve, just hours after his casting was publicly announced, he was informed by mail that he was slated to resume filming Superman 2 on July 16, 1979. This schedule would have left the actor just 5 days between finishing his scenes on Somewhere in Time and climbing back into his tights, a whirlwind turnaround he was unwilling to commit to. Furthermore, Reeve was quietly furious following Richard Donner's ousting, and was nervous about working under his successor, Richard Lester, as well as having apprehensions over the changes introduced in the Newman script. In a last-ditch effort, the star filed suit in New York, claiming that because the single production he was contracted for had now become 2, his agreement with the producers was null and void. Of course, the Salkinds did not see eye to eye with Reeve and immediately countersued the actor for breach of contract. Refusing to back down, however, like Margot Kidder, Reeve took the conflict public and painted the Salkinds as untrustworthy and deceitful Hollywood puppet masters. Fortunately, the Salkinds wisely acquiesced, and to fight shy of any serious litigation, Reeve and the producers renegotiated his contract, which consequently afforded him substantial creative authority. And because Marlon Brando was out of the picture, and his own star had risen significantly in the 2 years since the first film's release, Reeve would receive second billing under Gene Hackman, and was to be paid twice his original salary, $500,000, to bring Superman back to cinemas. Well before Reeve's contractual battle, Donner's firing, and the first round of principal photography, Christopher Lee and Oliver Reed were both toying with the idea of playing the sequel's main antagonist, General Zod, but the producers instead settled on who may have seemed an unlikely choice. By the mid-1970s, Oscar-nominated English actor Terrence Stamp thought his career was over, and after a messy breakup, he took his talents overseas in hopes of finding work abroad. Then known for Peter Ustinov's Billy Budd, William Wyler's The Collector, and John Schlesinger's Far From the Madding Crowd, Stamp had played the hero, the romantic suitor, and the creepy stalker for some of filmmaking's most renowned auteurs, and was about to add Interstellar Conqueror to his resume. While shooting a film in India, the actor received a telegram from the Salkinds asking if he would be interested in playing the bad guy in their Superman films. But it was the mention of Marlon Brando's name that drew his eye, Stamp having long idolized the actor, and so the opportunity to perform opposite the man himself was utterly irresistible. Although he was at first petrified to act alongside the megastar, Stamp said that Brando was surprisingly funny and disarming. When he asked his distinguished co-star why he hadn't read the script, Brando replied that he needed the money and was worried the script was, quote, crap. On the contrary, Stamp described Zod as a terribly serious tyrant devoid of a sense of humor, who he felt would settle for nothing less than unconditional admiration. Stamp clarified that he never sought to make the character into a multifaceted role, but instead leaned into Zod's one-note nature. The actor was also responsible for having our 3 antagonists move carefully in unison, as if they were extensions of one another. And Stamp said that he went to great lengths to maintain an air of control over his co-stars in order to strengthen his militant persona.
Kneel before Zod!
Zod was first introduced in 1961 inside Adventure Comics 283, but his 2 Kryptonian disciples were totally fabricated for Superman's big screen debut, and would only later show up on the page. As an aside, Mario Puzo's script included a 4th villain who also found his origins in the comics, Jax-Ur, Zod's sleeper agent who takes on human personas to advance his agenda. But the character obviously did not survive the rewrites. Up-and-coming English actor Sarah Douglas had attempted to test for the role of the beautiful but deadly Ursa, destroyer of men and snakes alike, but she was dismissed multiple times before even getting her foot in the door. Undeterred, Douglas won the part after giving Richard Donner an impressive tongue-lashing for her unprofessional treatment. On the character, Douglas said that while she is most definitely evil, She was attracted to the dichotomy of Ursa's seemingly innocent curiosity and childlike delight in discovering Earth and her new solar powers.
I have powers beyond reason here.
Like Stamp, sharing the screen with Marlon Brando was also a bucket list moment for Douglas. However, her experience was distastefully different from her co-stars. According to the actor, Brando not only pinned his lines to her body for one of their takes, but she claims that he brazenly groped her while on set, although she chose not to report the incident, saying that she was too starstruck to take offense. In addition to this incident and being cut by her flying wires, Douglas suffered further injury while filming the shot showing Ursa and Nan lifting up a full city bus, which was actually supported by a large chain. However, when the bus slightly settled above her, she misjudged its weight and tore her rib muscles. At 6 feet 6 inches tall before he put on lifts, former heavyweight boxer Jack O'Halloran was the perfect fit for Nan's towering physical presence, but went on to become the most brutally honest critic of the second film's production. In addition to his safety woes, O'Halloran's experience on the film was soured early on when he discovered that the Salkinds had failed to pay him despite having already worked for 2 months. Enraged by the flagrant oversight, the hulking figure stormed into Pierre Spengler's office, snatched his collar, and yanked the lanky producer over his desk, demanding payment, after which a very shaken Spengler compliantly surrendered. Richard Lester said he saw Nan as a large dog seeking praise from his owners, and O'Halloran stated that while he loved working with Donner, he thought, quote, Lester was as big an asshole as the Salkinds, and later referred to the filmmaker as a TV director. On working with Christopher Reeve, O'Halloran claimed that by the time the second production rolled around, stardom had gone to the actor's head, and that he was at times difficult to work with. Of course, he was likely unaware of Reeve's exhaustive battle with the Salkinds and what became his somewhat unenthusiastic return. According to the producer's DVD commentary, the speaking voices or lack thereof for each of the 3 villains were enhanced in post-production, the filmmakers wanting their vocals to stand out. While at least some dialogue looping is evident, Nan's animalistic grunts and squeals are certainly not organic to the actor. On top of its returning main players, Superman 2 boasts a distinguished supporting cast of both familiar and lesser-known faces, many of whom had hopped over from Star Wars or James Bond, as the productions of the first 2 Superman films overlapped both in time and location with either franchise. Harry Potter fans might recognize one of the Eiffel Tower terrorists as a young Richard Griffiths, who of course went on to portray Uncle Dursley in the Wizarding film series. John Morton, who had just finished work on The Empire Strikes Back, plays the astronaut who first spots Ursa flying over the lunar surface.
That's it. I'm dreaming.
And screenwriter, actor, and voice talent Shane Rimmer plays the second controller opposite a returning John Ratzenberger. Rimmer also having made several appearances in the Bond series. And I'd be remiss not to add that Ratzenberger had briefly appeared in The Empire Strikes Back as Major Bren Derlin. Stage and screen actor Anthony Sher, an accomplished Shakespearean thespian, makes a brief but amusing appearance as the gum-chewing Niagara Falls Hotel bellhop.
In just old days. Oh, I see.
British film and television performer John Hollis manifests as a Kryptonian elder in The Fortress of Solitude, and fans likely recognize the actor's striking features from his role as Lobot in The Empire Strikes Back. Hollis also provides another link to the James Bond series, as he went on to have an uncredited role as a copyright-free Ernst Stavro Blofeld in For Your Eyes Only the following year. And speaking of Bond, fans of the Roger Moore era would be quick to recognize the faux southern drawl of Clifton James as the East Houston Sheriff, famously having played Sheriff J.W. Pepper in 2 of Moore's Bond outings.
They have a wide selection.
Canadian actor Peter Whitman plays the helpless Deputy Dwayne and was also a member of the 007 Club, having appeared in 1977's The Spy Who Loved Me. Richard LeParmentier stepped in as the field reporter on the scene in East Houston, and the actor is yet another Star Wars cast member, having had the honor of being the first character force-choked by Darth Vader in the 1977 original. As an aside, he and Sarah Douglas had appeared together in 2 films prior to Superman 2, and the pair would later be married from 1981 to 1984.
What I do now, I do for the sake of the people of the world.
A wigged E.G. Marshall appears as the President of the United States and brings so much gravitas to the role that he single-handedly elevates the stakes. Canadian-American actor and pro wrestler Pepper Martin plays Nasty Don's diner patron Rocky, who gives Superman his first on-screen beating.
Oh boy, it's Mr. Wonderful.
Pamela Mandel was cast as the helpless waitress, making her first of 2 appearances in the series, and Tommy Duggan plays the owner and bartender, the English actor having a nearly 40-year career in film and television, which included playing a priest in Richard Donner's The Omen. In smaller roles, we see English stunt coordinator Alan Stewart as the confused Metropolis cabbie.
Break.
Angus McInnes, who had also just finished work on Star Wars as Gold Squadron leader Dutch Vander, plays the prison guard who discovers Lex and Otis's decoys.
Hey, Mom, look! Uh-huh. Yeah, honey, that's nice.
Canadian child actor and future voice talent Hadley Kaye made his 3rd feature film appearance as the carefree little boy who takes quite the plunge over Niagara Falls before being swooped up by Superman. British character actor and children's television host Gordon Rawlings makes his first of 2 series appearances as the tea-sipping lakeside fisherman who witnesses the miraculous arrival of Zod and his posse. And Marcus D'Amico made his big-screen debut as East Houston local boy Willie, although his small-town American accent is less than convincing.
Please, Mr. General, please let my daddy down.
In a particularly cold-hearted deleted scene, the boy attempts to flee following his father's assault, but non-presumably kills him before he makes a getaway. While Vancouver stage actor Louise Willoughby had momentarily popped up in Superman the movie, she is given a little more to do in its sequel, her character also given the name Louise, a Daily Planet secretary who ends up on the wrong side of Lois Lane.
The big one's just as strong as Superman.
With their stars locked in and lawsuits settled, the Salkinds generously gave Lester a year-long runway to deliver the film. And while the original production was defined by its financially driven tensions and creative disruptions, the second round would be lamented for its almost bureaucratic atmosphere and workmanlike approach. Regardless, Superman 2 ultimately offered up some of the most ambitious filmmaking ever put to screen. Principal photography on the revised sequel commenced in August 1979 at Pinewood Studios, nearly a year after the release of Superman the movie. The NASA control room with Shane Rimmer and John Ratzenberger being the first scene shot. Several major scenes had yet to be captured, however, which of course did not include any changes or additions found in the rewrite, which included the Niagara Falls segment, Zod's attack on rural America, and the climactic nighttime showdown on the streets of Metropolis. Lois and Clark's investigation at Niagara Falls was also heavily reworked, the script originally having a scene in which Lois daringly fires a gun at Clark, who of course is then forced to reveal his true identity.
Lois, don't be insane!
It is you.
This lost scene was used for screen testing Lois, and so that footage is all that exists of it on film. While all exteriors and background plates were captured on location around and directly over the awe-inspiring natural landmark, neither Margot Kidder nor her stunt double would be asked to leap into the frigid, rapid waters at the base of the falls. And so the river was recreated at Pinewood. Although a dummy was used for the on-location shots of her being swept downstream, in the end, Kidder insisted on performing at least one stunt herself, and was tied to a rope and dangled like a lure just offshore for the shot of Lois clinging to a log. As far as reshoots were concerned, due to Marlon Brando's removal, the scene in which Clark admits his love for Lois and voluntarily enters the power removal chamber was reshot, and Brando's deletion opened the door for Superman's Kryptonian mother, Lara, to have a larger presence.
You must live as a mortal.
Again played by Susanna York, who was happy to see her role expanded, as Brando had certainly overshadowed her character in the first film. This switch-up was the idea of Ilya Salkind, who felt the character's nurturing nature better suited Superman's plight in the second film. Another scene shot by Donner saw Superman's powers restored through Jor-El's self-sacrifice, who reaches out and touches Kal-El to evoke Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam. The Salkinds, on the other hand, felt this visual metaphor went a little too far. While not obvious, during Superman's mortal transformation we get glimpses at his alien anatomy, which was another idea from Ilya Salkind. Some scenes filmed by Donner could not be omitted, however, either because of budgetary constraints or due to an actor's unavailability.
Australia.
Because nearly 2 years had passed since the end of filming on Part 1, physical continuity errors persist throughout the third act, and therefore certain actors, most obviously Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve, had lost or gained weight and changed hair and makeup styles. Like the first production, filming took place both in and out of studio, and Superman 2 required as much globetrotting as its predecessor. For the assault on East Houston, Idaho, the nature conservation site Chobham Common in the English ceremonial county of Surrey doubled for rural America. This destructive demonstration of Kryptonian strength replaced Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz's original concept, which would have shown the villain circling the globe and decimating famous landmarks, only some of which remains. For the scene showing Superman flying to the tropics to fetch fresh flowers, the production actually sent a limited first unit to the British Virgin Islands, an expensive decision that remained controversial among the financiers and Alexander Salkind. For the opening set piece in the heart of Paris, the production only filmed in the historical city for a couple of days, where rain and an overcast sky taunted them the majority of their stay. The Eiffel Tower itself was recreated as a 6-foot-high miniature, in addition to full-scale sections being crafted. Although some establishing shots from the first film would be cut and pasted into the sequel, for practical reasons the production did not return to New York, instead capturing all new Metropolis exteriors on Pinewood's backlot, where New York's 42nd Street was translated into a tremendous $4 million set. This stupendous construction required over 5,000 tons of sand, cement, and tar, 250,000 feet of timber, 66,000 sheets of plywood, 6,000 cubic yards of concrete, 500,000 feet of scaffolding, and 10,000 square feet of glass, and took 116 craftsmen and a total of 16 weeks to complete. A scale replication of the downtown area was also created for certain establishing and aerial shots seen during Superman's brawl with the Kryptonian invaders. This amazing model included miniature moving traffic and an intricate system of complex lighting that allowed the miniature shots to blend perfectly with the full-size set. For the scale shots depicting the city bus being hurled at Superman, even a shrunken Christopher Reeve was sculpted. The many exploding vehicles, on the other hand, were life-size cars filled with an explosive chemical and modified to blow up as safely as possible. Lester said that despite the technical obstacles, this was his favorite set to shoot on because it gave him the space he needed to experiment with various gags, some of which the producers were vocally opposed to. The set was so expansive, in fact, that at one point Pierre Spengler, a true businessman at heart, had the brilliant idea to shoot a whole other movie on it at half the cost. But just 2 weeks after filming ended, hurricane-level winds raged through London and obliterated the set. Unfortunately, the entire Fortress of Solitude set had to be reconstructed, and whole new sections were built for Superman and Lois's romantic scenes. Tragically, however, the production lost yet another integral member of the previous film's leadership. While working as the second unit director on 1980's The Empire Strikes Back, production designer John Barry collapsed on set and died in hospital 1 month later from meningitis. He was just 43 years old. Although Barry's shoes would be impossible to fill, British art director and production designer Peter Merton was brought on to continue his legacy. Merton was certainly nobody's second choice, however, having worked with Stanley Kubrick on Dr. Strangelove and at the time was a semi-regular member of the James Bond crew, credited on 3 of the films, including Guy Hamilton's Goldfinger. The loss of original cinematographer Jeffrey Unsworth placed a heavy burden on Lester as the Salkinds mandated Unsworth's style carry over to the second film. Although Lester himself had never been a comic book reader, he wanted to reflect the same bold, punchy color schemes that adorned their pages, and hired cinematographer Robert Painter to bring his vision to life, Superman 2 marking Painter's most high-profile project at that time. Nonetheless, the constraints of continuity prevented the film from taking on its own visual identity. As a filmmaker, Lester did not share Donner's vision of what he described as a grand and sweeping David Lean homage, and had no desire to present the material with such dire earnestness, and instead put his effort toward playing up the comedic elements. In addition to the Musketeers and Beatles films, Lester gained acclaim for his 1976 Robin Hood swan song, Robin and Marian. And while Donner seemed ill-suited for the impersonal, militaristic approach to large-scale filmmaking, Lester was happy to fall in line.
Now, right. See Daily Planet sign? Up top there, there's a little sign. Cross. Oh. I'll go find it. Excuse me. Yeah.
Bringing a more lackadaisical attitude to the production, the director admittedly spent as much time dallying about the studio lot as he did behind the camera, confident that the individual units could run themselves. Lester preferred to shoot each scene with at least 2 cameras, often more. And although the director had a reputation for working well with actors, this choice irritated some of the principal players, who were unable to determine when they were in close-up or on camera. The fact that the director also sometimes refrained from giving them their marks didn't help, Lester wanting to have room to explore the scene and move naturally within it. Mark McClure, on the contrary, described Lester as devoid of exploration. Where Donner encouraged improvisation, Lester only asked them to speak their lines and stand in place, and added that the second film's production lost the family atmosphere of the first shoot. Offering a more diplomatic perspective, Terrence Stamp said that nobody disliked Lester, but rather resented the situation, and that they recognized the uncomfortable position the director had been coerced into. Crew members generally found Lester to be lighthearted and amenable, and noted that his apparent lack of allegiance to the previous production allowed them a great deal of freedom.
Background action!
more than about sort of 15 miles an hour. Can you do that much damage in 15 miles an hour?
When you hit a brick wall, yes.
Okay.
I think if you do it any less, it won't
So you won't see the fact that I was actually doing that, right?
No, sir.
Okay.
Despite the adjustment in style, Lester and Christopher Reeve generally got along, and the actor admitted that Donner's successor considerably sped up production. And even Ilya Salkind admired the filmmaker for his expediency in capturing shots, adding that Lester's need to stay on schedule was almost like a sickness, which from a producer's standpoint made him the ideal director. However, Reeve would later express a much less flattering perspective on his time with the film, saying that the sequel's production was, quote, the lowest you can go without actually cheating. Co-star Margot Kidder echoed Reeve's sentiment, reiterating that, overall, filming was done fast and on the cheap. Contrary to this perception, because audiences had already witnessed unparalleled on-screen flight, the challenge of the second film was to take that concept to new heights. And so, for the sequel's ambitious airborne action, displaying multiple characters soaring through the sky and interacting all at once, Zoran Perisic took over as head of the flying unit, having been the creator of the Zoptic effect that was so crucial to the first film's success. In addition to more sophisticated lenses and lighting effects, his miraculous invention was further enhanced for the sequel with the introduction of computer technology that allowed smoother and more precise camera movements, ultimately delivering to audiences the most complex fantasy aerobatics ever orchestrated at that time. Perisic and his team also experimented with various other techniques, including split screen, in order to capture multi-character shots more efficiently. All of this, of course, on top of the even more intricate wirework riggings that allowed the performers to be essentially stacked over one another while moving fluidly in sync. Overall, Perisic said that his experience on the first Superman films was a nerve-wracking endeavor, because not only had the technology been developed in haste, with great pressure from the producers, but he knew that the fate of the entire production hung in the balance.
What have we done to top part one? I think that what we've done is to unify the style of the picture a bit more. Part one, we had the obligation to tell the backstory, all the history, to take you all the way to Canada and growing up and all that kind of stuff, which was fine, it was lovely, but now we've done the exposition, and I think people will enjoy seeing that we start off with action from the first frame. You know, it's just boom.
Filming Superman 2 spanned 6 months and mercifully came to an end on March 10th, 1980, which marked a total of almost 3 years since the start of shooting on the two-movie production. But as it turned out, their troubles were not over yet. Officially, the record states that John Williams was simply unavailable to return to score the second film due to scheduling conflicts. But according to Jake Rawson in his 2008 book Superman vs. Hollywood, Williams was in fact ready and willing to resume scoring, and met with Ilya Salkind and Richard Lester for a screening of a rough assembly cut, which Salkind sat out. However, when Williams exited the screening room, he approached Salkind and told him that he simply could not work with Lester. It seems that during the viewing, Lester and the composer broke into an argument over creative differences, and by the time the screening ended, Williams was out. This unfortunate loss sent the Salkinds on the hunt for a new composer, and Lester was quick to suggest his regular collaborator, Ken Thorne. Recording the music for Superman 2 took place from March 25th through May 2nd, 1980, And because the London Symphony Orchestra was deemed too expensive to rehire, Thorne performed the music with a contracted studio session orchestra, although music editor Bob Hathaway was willing to return. On the surface, Williams and Thorne's musical identities couldn't have been further apart, with Thorne primarily known for scoring comedies, having won an Oscar for the 1966 musical comedy A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. This difference in tone, however, was irrelevant, as Thorne was commanded by the producers to reuse all of Williams' leitmotifs, and therefore the composer created little in the way of original music. Thorne's largest contribution came in the music for our three villains, although he again borrowed from Williams' Krypton and Fortress of Solitude themes. The song Pick Up the Pieces by the Scottish funk and R&B group The Average White Band also features in the soundtrack during the East Houston segment. But this was not the original intent. Richard Lester had tasked Thorne with adapting the song into a sound-alike version, which resulted in the original song East Houston Cafe. While Pick Up the Pieces was used after all, Thorne's song can be heard playing in Don's Diner at the end of the film. Another original song, titled Honeymoon Hotel, can be heard while Clark and Lois are shown the Niagara Falls honeymoon suite. The sequel's soundtrack hit shelves as a single LP from Warner Brothers Records in June 1981, and again issued on audio cassette.
So, it comes in from right.
Once editor Stuart Baird opted not to return, again out of allegiance to Richard Donner, Lester's longtime editor John Victor Smith was called in. He and assistant editor Peter Watson handed over 2 million feet of footage from 2 separate productions. But, fortunately, the film would not hit cinemas for over 6 months. It is not unfair to say that Superman 2 is, therefore, a Frankenstein-like patchwork that no doubt lacks firm cohesion and continuity, but yet it is still somehow greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, he's well clear there.
In the early days of the home video boom, it wasn't uncommon for the first several minutes of a sequel to be devoted to recapping the events of the preceding film. And Superman 2 was no different. The decision to do so made in post-production to ensure any newcomers who hadn't caught the first movie in cinemas would be up to date. Notably, new footage of Zod and his minions being lured into a trap is included. And of course, this retooled opener carefully edits around Marlon Brando's Jor-El and replaces the actor with a voice impersonator.
You 3 criminals have been caught in a further act of seditious treason.
Richard and Robert Greenberg did not return, however, and the opening credits were slightly redesigned by CameraWorks. And I surmise that this was a financially motivated decision, as the titles no doubt have a cheaper appearance. On the film's patriotic ending, which sees Superman flying the US flag back to the White House, Christopher Reeve said that it was probably something they wouldn't have been caught dead doing 5 years earlier. But with the close of the 1970s, he thought perhaps Superman could help usher in a new kind of national pride and heal the country's shattered psyche. By the time the sequel finished filming, the Salkinds owed over $70 million to various Swiss banks, who were dialing up the pressure to get the film out on schedule in order to recoup their investments. Therefore, to minimize risk and maximize profits, Warner Brothers and the producers decided upon an unorthodox release strategy. The film would hit each market at its busiest time of year, And to curb any potential bad press, and to prevent the film from becoming yesterday's news, the studio put a gag order on all cast and crew members in the UK and North America until it was released in those territories. Warner Brothers was in fact so on edge about the film's box office fate that they sued ABC Television for copyright infringement after the premiere of their new flying superhero series, The Greatest American Hero. Although this baseless knee-jerk lawsuit was tossed out in court. At the same time, false rumors began to swirl that producer Dino De Laurentiis had purchased the rights from the Salkinds, putting their grip on the property in question. Despite putting on a confident facade before the press, the producers understood very well that they needed another hit.
We can all say on Superman, really, that there was not one place where it didn't go well. It goes someplace better, someplace much better, but it's always done very well all over, wherever it went.
On their business practices and the behind-the-scenes troubles of the Musketeers and Superman, Alexander Salkind commented, "In my father's day and in mine, when we made films it was the actor's job to act, the director's job to direct, and the producer was expected to serve the film financially and realize as big a return as possible for the investors. If that meant cutting it into 2 pieces or 22 pieces and selling it as a serial, then fine. That was proper. That was business. Today the industry has grown, expanded, and there are new rules and properties. The cinema may be better for it, but the business is, let's say, more complex."
Superman 2, The Adventure continues. There is something evil in the skies headed for Metropolis. 3 outlaws from the planet Krypton with the same powers as Superman.
All this accumulated knowledge, when will these dummies learn to use a doorknob?
Superman, where are you?
Now, the adventure continues at the Eiffel Tower and on the moon. And the romance continues. This is the spectacular challenge.
Superman!
General, would you care to step outside?
To a climactic super battle in the skies over Metropolis. If you've only seen the first part, you haven't seen the best part. Superman 2, The Adventure continues this June.
Superman 2 made its public debut in Australia on Thursday, December 4th, 1980, playing on 19 screens, and opened in South African cinemas just 2 days later. It premiered in France on December 10th, and on Christmas Day in Italy and Spain. 3 months later, it held its London Royal premiere at the Warner West End Leicester Square, and opened wide in the UK and West Germany on Easter weekend. After hitting Finnish cinemas the following week and Japanese theaters in June, North America became one of the last markets to receive the now sizzling hot sequel, the studio intentionally holding off for a lucrative summer release. The marketing for Superman 2 was a staggering endeavor, reportedly being allotted an advertising budget twice the size of its predecessor at $17 million, taking the grand total of licensed tie-ins to 200, leading to a combined 1,200 products. Ultimately, It was reported that $109 million was spent promoting the two Superman films.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
Now viewed as a kind of deal with the devil, the production gained their largest benefactor in a $40,000 sponsorship agreement with Philip Morris ahead of filming. Because of this alliance, the company's Marlboro brand of cigarettes was centrally featured in the film, with the Man of Steel himself being hurled into a fictionalized Marlboro truck. It is also no coincidence that while Lois Lane isn't portrayed as a smoker in the comics, Margot Kidder's Lois is an out-and-out chain smoker on screen, a choice motivated by their partnership.
Don't tell me lung cancer, right?
While this sponsorship reportedly led to a congressional investigation, spurred by anti-smoking activists, I was unable to fully substantiate this claim.
Come on, kids. If you want to grow up fast, take one of these.
Ironically, at the same time Superman made his second flight across movie screens around the globe, the UK's Health Education Council launched an anti-smoking campaign that featured the Man of Tomorrow pummeling the diabolical villain, Nicotine, who sought to recruit kids into his smoking army.
I never say yes to a cigarette.
Elliot S. Maggin was again commissioned to write a novelized Superman adventure, this time producing his equally beloved Last Son of Krypton follow-up, Miracle Monday, again published by Warner Books as a 250-page paperback in 1981. Like its predecessor, his second novel does not tie into the films whatsoever and follows Superman's battle against an interdimensional servant of hell who possesses an innocent time traveler and unleashes chaos the world over, all surrounding a Superman-centric annual holiday. Maggin's work is now considered one of the greatest Superman stories ever told, and went on to have a significant influence in the comics. To further promote the sequel's release and reintroduce the character into public consciousness, Superman the Movie landed on the waning CED format or video disc from both Warner Home Video and RCA, although, frustratingly, was spread across two sides of two separate discs, but nonetheless gave North American audiences a chance to refresh their memories before Superman flew back into cinemas. Almost half a year after most of the world had their look, the blockbuster follow-up premiered in the US on May 31st, 1981, in another showing at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. It made its New York debut on June 1st at the National Theater, which followed a limited release in select cinemas that May, and went wide about 3 weeks later on June 19th. Showing on almost 1,400 screens across Canada and the United States. In North America, it again broke box office records, earning over $4 million in its opening day and $5 million the next, which at that time was the highest single-day gross in box office history, surpassing 1977's Star Wars. It went on to claim $108 million domestically, becoming the second highest grossing film of 1981, behind Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark. It later flew by 1979's Star Trek The Motion Picture to claim the highest grossing opening weekend at that time, taking in $14 million, doubling Superman the Movie's opening haul. It held the #1 spot for 3 weeks, and became the third highest grossing film of 1981 in North America, ending its run with a worldwide gross of over $216 million.
Superman 2, the most exciting movie event of our time, rated PG.
And so forth. But on the other hand, I love the love story, and I was just thinking, watching that scene, the casting director of this film should get a lot of the credit, because this kind of material could easily slide right off into the totally ridiculous. And Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve, Gene Hackman and the rest are good enough actors to really be able to carry it off.
And I think Reeve really has to get the credit here. If you didn't buy that this Superman character was real in some way, that his emotions were real at least, the whole thing would fall off. It would be either...
Like the first film, Superman 2 received a warm critical reception, although some critics took issue with Lester's insertion of slapstick comedy. Richard Donner even chimed in and stated that he felt this betrayed the more earnest tone established in his film, and he and Tom Mankiewicz also took issue with many reviewers who praised Richard Lester for scenes they had shot and written. While the film did not stir up the massive awards attention its predecessor had, Superman 2 received 4 Saturn Award nominations at the 1982 ceremony. Best Actor for Christopher Reeve, Best Actress for Margot Kidder, Best Music for Ken Thorne, and the production once again won the award for Best Science Fiction Film.
Per day. Hundreds to choose from, including Raging Bull, Ordinary People, Airplane, Coming Home, Fame, Superman the Movie, The Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond, or many other great movies on video at only $2 per movie per day. Where? At the Warehouse. Why not see the movies of your choice at home tonight? Movies on video, $2 per movie per day. Where? At the Warehouse.
Even though only 2 years had passed, the home video and cable markets had dramatically expanded by the early 1980s. And following in the steps of the first film, Superman 2 became a gigantic hit on the home entertainment market, landing on VHS and Betamax from Warner Home Video on October 12, 1981, only 4 months after its American debut, and next moved to video disc in 1982. More so, with the sequel's at-home arrival came a controversial maneuver from Warner Brothers. Instead of selling the cassettes outright to video rental stores, the studio would now only lease their library to retailers for rental, meaning that if a title they had leased to a given retailer didn't sell, the owners of that outfit would immediately be in the hole financially. This stingy strategy, which aimed to treat video rental outlets like movie theaters, obviously rubbed those in the video rental business the wrong way, and many flat out refused to carry Warner-owned titles thereafter.
Isn't that wonderful?
As a result of having to forfeit pieces of ownership to Warner Brothers in exchange for financial aid, the studio held the television distribution rights to both films until 1981, after which they defaulted back to the Salkinds, who wasted no time in producing a TV-exclusive version.
Tomorrow. On will soon present the story of a hard-working young career woman who finds herself falling for an ambitious young man on his way up.
Easy, miss. I've got you.
Superman.
You've got me! Who's got you?
Although Warner Brothers had already facilitated the television premiere of the first movie in October 1980, where it went on to show across several major networks, it was simply the widely viewed theatrical version. And by contract, once the 2 Superman movies hit theaters, the Salkinds took total editorial control, and had already prepared a lucrative deal with ABC Television to exclusively air both films on the small screen. However, because this network agreement paid the producers by the minute, they were incentivized to make the broadcasts as long as reasonably possible. What resulted was a 3-hour and 8-minute cut of Superman the movie, which was essentially the original assembly cut before Donner and Baird edited it down to its theatrical 2 hours and 23-minute runtime. This lengthier version made its broadcast debut on ABC in February 1982, released over 2 nights, and re-aired again that November over 1 night, and was afterward broadcast worldwide. The producers gave carte blanche to any networks airing the film to cut down this version as they saw fit, resulting in a broad variety of TV edits, all of which abandoned the film's Panavision presentation for a pan and scan image that better suited the television sets of the era, also being mastered in 16mm with a mono soundtrack, and so these televised variations have long been considered inferior alternatives. In 1988, both the theatrical and international television version of Superman hit syndication, which resulted in even further random adjustments to the longer cut, usually edited down for commercial breaks and bumpers. After a run on paid cable and the USA Network, Warner Bros. Television put the complete 188-minute extended cut into syndication, which included never-before-seen footage. This version mostly aired in the Los Angeles area, however, and went unseen by the rest of the world.
By the way, Miss Tessmacher, your mother sends her love.
Superman 2.
After its theatrical version premiered on Pittsburgh's Cube cable service in April 1982, Superman 2 befell an almost identical fate as its predecessor, with an additional 24 minutes of previously unseen footage edited back in for its televised debut, the footage having been mostly shot by Richard Donner and hence excised from the theatrical version. For its 1984 network television premiere, ABC edited this extended cut down to 2 hours and 24 minutes, still 17 minutes longer than the theatrical cut. ABC continued to cut back the extended version in subsequent airings, but the complete 2-hour and 26-minute incarnation was shown in various international markets.
Superman 2.
Perhaps the biggest change from the sequel's theatrical version is the inclusion of an expanded ending, in which it is confirmed that all 3 rogue Kryptonians survived their confrontation with Superman at the Fortress of Solitude, and are seen being apprehended by the police along with Lex Luthor. Like the first film, however, this longer version mostly just extends scenes and sequences from the theatrical cut. While decades passed and these lesser-seen versions faded into obscurity, sometime before 2017, an inventory of Warner Bros. Film library uncovered a complete original master of the 188-minute television cut of Superman the movie, which was miraculously in its proper 2:3:5:1 aspect ratio. This unlikely discovery led to the extended TV version being made available on the home entertainment market for the first time in October 2017. This history-making Blu-ray fell under the Warner Archive Collection label and was marketed as Superman the Movie Extended Cut. Both films made their Laserdisc premieres in 1983, and another Laserdisc print followed for both in 1990. And yet another one for Superman 2 in 1996 as a special widescreen edition. Again, all from Warner Home Video. In 2000, Warner partnered with editor and film producer Michael Thaw to make a complete restoration of what was essentially the director's cut of Superman the movie, which would require several minutes to be borrowed from the extended television version. Although, as it turned out, only 8 minutes were salvageable for restoration at that time. With the cooperation of Richard Donner, who he had worked with on 1985's Ladyhawke, Thaw spent over a year piecing together the new version. In addition to cleaning up the then 22-year-old footage, Donner suggested correcting some discoloration issues with Superman's costume, which were the result of blue screen having caused his blue tights to take on a greenish hue. Initially, Thaw suggested they make the film shorter, wanting to cut back both the criminal car chase scene during Superman's first night out, as well as Lois's lovelorn inner monologue. But Donner refused the notion. Finally, in March 2001, a test screening was held in San Antonio, Texas, which was planned to precede a wide theatrical release. But sadly, this never came to fruition. Instead, in May 2001, the newly dubbed Special Edition hit DVD shelves alongside Superman 2, both making their debut on the format. The release offered numerous special features, including documentaries directed by Thaw himself, and a commentary from Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz.
The movie and the complete collection now on video cassette and DVD.
Despite going uncredited, Superman 2 still contains a great deal of footage shot by Donner, including most of the opening Kryptonian trial, the lunar attack on astronauts, most of Zod's assault on the White House, Clark's humiliation and subsequent payback at Dawn's diner, parts of the attack on the Daily Planet, Superman flying Lois home, and all footage featuring Gene Hackman's face. What's more, despite Donner's ousting, a cameo from the act's director was intentionally left in the sequel's theatrical cut, where he can be seen strolling by Lois and Clark as they pull into Dawn's diner. The producers claiming this was meant to demonstrate that they had no hard feelings toward the filmmaker. On the other hand, Donner saw his brief appearance in the sequel as evidence of his uncredited artistic contribution. Because of this and his very public falling out with the Salkinds and Pierre Spengler, speculation surrounding a possible Donner cut of the film almost immediately began circulating across the fandom. But it would be over 20 years before they got their answer. In 2001, 6 tons of original footage from each Superman production was uncovered by Michael Thaw, which of course was used for his 2001 restoration released on DVD. But among the endless strips of images laid much of the long-lost footage Donner fans were clamoring for. And not long after, Warner Brothers reached out to the director with the proposal of at last making his own cut of the sequel. Their idea being that the filmmaker would edit together a version as close to his own as possible, but at the time did not have filming any new elements in mind. However, Donner was not interested in the slightest in revisiting what amounted to a very bad memory, and repeatedly declined the opportunity. To further complicate matters, most of the footage was still owned by the Salkinds, and any scenes featuring Marlon Brando were entangled in a legal web that had gone unresolved since its making. In 2004, following years of pleading with Warner Brothers, a fan-made version of Donner's Superman 2 began making the rounds on a bootleg DVD, given the title Superman 2 Restored International Cut. This assemblage consisted of footage copied from various television broadcasts over the course of many years. It was so widely available, in fact, that Warner Brothers caught wind and took aggressive legal action. Regardless, Donner's true vision had yet to be revealed. Fortunately, in 2005, the production of Superman Returns, which is nebulously set in what has become known as the Donnerverse timeline, opened the legal window necessary to make the Richard Donner cut a reality. Because Returns planned to reuse footage of Brando from the original production, Warner Brothers made a deal to also use the footage in the creation of the Donner cut, and furthermore, resolved any rights issues with the producers, with Ilya Salkind in fact having become a champion of the new edit. However, without its director's involvement, Warner Brothers again relied solely on Michael Thaw to resurrect Donner's vision. Donner's main apprehension was the passage of time, the aging filmmaker no longer able to relate to his younger self, and couldn't see how he would approach the material decades on. Nonetheless, Thaw continued to lure in the disinclined filmmaker with peeks and teases of restored footage, and by mid-2006, Donner had slowly begun to take to the idea of revisiting his Superman sequel. A short time later, he at last agreed to board the project, but with tempered enthusiasm, and once again brought Tom Mankiewicz into the fold. While Donner was still forced to include some footage shot by Richard Lester, reportedly less than 20% was used in all, with Lester's comedic inserts specifically snipped out. Likewise, a small amount of Ken Thorne's original music was used to bridge together John Williams' original score, as the composer was unavailable to create any new music, although the sequel's new opening titles credit Williams as the sole composer. Over 200 new visual effects had to be rendered, which included the compositing of several unfinished effects shots from the original production. Entirely new footage was also filmed and inserted to represent shots Donner was never able to capture, although this was clearly done on a tight budget. Donner said looking at the remnants of his past wasn't easy, and Thaw added that it was obviously painful for the director to revisit the production. Donner dedicated the film to Christopher Reeve, who died less than 2 years earlier at 52 years old. Donner and Mankiewicz screened footage from Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, at the 2006 San Diego Comic-Con, which was followed by its world premiere on November 2, 2006 at the Directors Guild of America headquarters in Hollywood. This special screening also saw stars Margot Kidder, Mark McClure, Sarah Douglas, and Jack O'Halloran in attendance. And in a show of good faith, producer Ilya Salkind came to give his support. The film saw further screenings, and despite its limitations, was critically praised. It found its widest audience, however, on home media, hitting shelves and online markets on November 28, 2006, made available on DVD, Blu-ray, and HD DVD. This special release included an introduction by Richard Donner and a feature-length audio commentary from both Donner and Mankiewicz, in addition to the all-new behind-the-scenes featurette, Superman 2: Restoring the Vision. This release subsequently won a Saturn Award for Best DVD Special Edition, as well as Best Overall DVD at the Satellite Awards.
Superman Returns.
Hey, look who's back!
You have great power.
Lex Luthor. This is kind of a little reunion, isn't it?
Coinciding with the home media premiere of Superman Returns, Superman the Movie landed on Blu-ray in November 2006, and simultaneously joined both cuts of Superman 2 and the other films in the series in a limited steel case DVD Ultimate Collector's Edition, with Part 2 also available separately as a standalone 2-disc package. This collection boasted over 20 hours of bonus content, although none of the extras were original to this release. In June 2011, a region-free 8-disc Blu-ray digipack of the 5 films, which marked the format debut for Superman 2, was released in all markets and included the supplementary material seen in the 2006 DVD collection.
Fly and get it.
In December 2017, Superman the Movie was selected for preservation by the U.S. Film Registry at the Library of Congress. And the next year, the film's 40th anniversary was honored with a wide theatrical release, which showcased an all-new Dolby Vision transfer from its original camera negative. April 2023 saw the debut of both films on Ultra HD Blu-ray, packaged with the other 2 Reeve films as part of a 4-film franchise box set, which were also available as standalone discs. Here, Superman's 70mm 6-track stereo mix was offered in 5.1 surround sound for the theatrical version, and Dolby Atmos for the special edition. This collection was also sold as a limited edition steelbook box set, with each film's casing fitted with its theatrical poster art. What's more, issue number 1 of the 2021 DC comic series Superman 78 was also included, the start of a story that revived the Reeve continuity and acted as a direct sequel to Superman 2. The artwork for the nostalgic comic was modeled after the actors and production design of the first 2 films. This set additionally offered a book of promotional photos and a certificate of authenticity. Now out of print, this exclusive collection sells at a high price in various online markets. John Williams' music also saw further iterations and had its first CD release in 1987. However, in order to squeeze the data onto a single disc, this release omitted the tracks Growing Up and Lex Luthor's Lair. In 1998, Veracé Sarah Band released a newly recorded version of the soundtrack from composer John Debney and the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. And just 2 years later, Rhino Records issued a special expanded edition in a 2-CD set. In February 2008, in honor of its 30th anniversary, an 8-CD box set from Film Score Monthly was released, simply titled Superman the Music, which also included Ken Thorne's complete soundtrack for Superman 2. This collection featured an all-new restoration of Williams' work across 2 discs, and even included rare alternative tracks. In 2019, following its 40th anniversary, another expanded edition from La La Land Records hit online stores, and this 3-disc set included the same alternative music offered in the 2008 collection, as well as Ken Thorne's music. While the producers say it was a unanimous decision to have Christopher Reeve smile into camera in the film's now iconic concluding shot, Richard Donner said that he had to fight just to get it in the picture. Regardless, it was a moment that made Superman real for millions of moviegoers then and countless more to come. And so, perhaps the magic of the first 2 Superman productions does not wholly lie within their star-studded casts, cunning effects, sweeping sets, or timeless music, but in its deeds of kindness, love, and loyalty. And maybe it was just a simple smile of a friendly stranger that made us believe a man could fly.
Don't know who you are, just a friend from another star. Here I am, like a kid out of school, holding hands with a gun. I'm a fool. Will you look at me, quivering like a little girl, shivering? You can see right through me. Can you read my mind? Can you picture the things I'm thinking of? Wondering why you are all the wonderful things you are. Look at me, quivering like a little